This is for the person who's tired of just dealing with constant stiffness or dull and achy pains and have no idea where it's even coming from, especially when it starts to impact your focus at work, making it hard to be present at work or at home, and you're tired of this being your reality. So let's make a new one, shall we? And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caden Hunter. I'm the founder of Fury Strength. I help remote workers improve posture so that they can feel more in control of their own bodies again. And it all starts with this very simple blueprint that I'm going to be taking you through, which is posture assessments. So to break down what posture even is, posture is just a series of behaviors. So if you have bad posture, that's just a bad series of behaviors within the body, meaning some areas are being overworked and overused while others are on hiatus. They're not being used enough to help support those overactive areas. So that's what these assessments are trying to single out so that we can know exactly where those are, and then we can start to take action on actually fixing them, especially the right way. Because when you know exactly what's off, it's going to save you time. It's going to make the efforts you spend more efficient, and you're going to get results more efficient and fast. That's why so many people I've worked with have seen results so fast. Some are seeing massive improvements in stiffness and pain in just 2 to 3 weeks, purely because we knew exactly where to start. So let's dive in, shall we? Real quick, guys, I completely forgot to mention this in the video itself, but the way that this is going to be structured is I'm going to take you through the posture assessments and what to look out for first. Then at the end, I'll kind of explain what each results mean, and based on those results, what area is throwing you off. That way it flows like a lab. It's not a labyrinth trying to keep up. It flows a little bit better. Hopefully that clears up any confusion ahead of time. Let's get back to the video. You'll want a camera set up at anywhere between chest to hip height. Then make sure you have a clear view from head to toe. Don't wear any shoes because shoes tend to try and hide some of the imbalances. Also, try to make sure you're on a flat surface, and if you're on like a tile surface, kind of like where I am now in this video here, don't wear socks, because socks will also make it kind of icky, and I'll show you why here throughout the video. So then you'll need, like I said, that camera set. You'll also want, as much as possible, if you have either an app or a physical leveler, you want to use that so that you can make sure some of the things you are or aren't seeing are truly accurate. If you don't have that, you can just use perspective lines. That's what I often have to use with posture assessments when I'm on calls, is some of these perspective lines, and I'll kind of walk you through how to do that as well. So for the very first, you'll also want some type of elevation that's firm and thick. We want about I'd say right around 3 to 4 inches, 2 to 3.5 inches of elevation. And once again, you'll see why as we go. So the very first assessment is the static or standstill test. And by the way, before I go any deeper, in the description of this video, I have a free little posture cheat sheet, posture checkoff list, so that as you're reviewing your own posture videos or the different assessments, you can check off what you're seeing based on what I'm telling you. And so again, that's completely free, by the way, my gift to you. So go grab that and then meet me back here in 5 seconds. So back to the video. So the very first test is the standstill test. And in all honesty, when it comes to static or standstill tests, there's not a whole lot you're actually going to see. A lot of times the only reason I even do this is, one, it's a good way for me to confirm or deny what. Sometimes I'll have clients, it's like, oh, I'm dealing with this, and then I'll kind of be able to look at and see what they're describing and see if it's like, oh yeah, they're right, or no, I'm not sure I see that. It also gives you kind of a head start, so it's still important to do it by all means, but when it comes to standing still, our body's not going to show those poor behaviors quite as much as the other two tests I'll run you through, but I'll still tell you exactly what to look for. So right here, the very first thing is you want to stand facing the camera with the feet at hip width apart, with the second and third toe facing forward. So the big toe will just be slightly inwards. And then what I like to have clients do is take a big deep breath in and then big exhale. This is just for relaxation purposes, because sometimes sometimes I'm a stranger on the internet. So if you're, being taken through a posture assessment for the first time, or maybe you're nervous to be on camera if you're doing this yourself, this is a good way to just relax. So then we can see what the body is actually telling us with these poor behaviors, aka poor posture, and we're not quite as nervous or maybe as tense as we would look. That way we can have as accurate of results as possible. So big deep breath in. The only thing we're going to be looking at from this specific angle are at the knees and at the feet. And so what we're looking at with the knees is, I'll kind of zoom in here so that you can see. It's kind of blurry, but what we're looking for is, are the knees, if set up right, if while standing here, while standing still, you see the knees caving inwards, or the knees aren't staying over the second and third toe. Maybe they're a little bit more over here. Maybe they're a little more inwards. That's something to note. So you can check that off in the static test. Or the other thing you may see is, again, sometimes you don't want to wear, this is why you don't wear shoes, but sometimes even socks can kind of hide this. But once more, these don't matter too much in the static. But anyways, you want to look for if the arches of the feet are flattening. And I'll show you a better way if you can't really tell, like kind of right here, you can't really see anything. So I'll show you a better way to do that as well. So then so all we're seeing on the front end here is at the knees and at the feet. So the next spot is same test, because the way this works is we go front, side, and then facing away. And I've included multiple different clips to show you both kind of what we're looking for in terms of what looks right and what kind of looks wrong. And so, because the thing about posture is there's no perfect posture. So there's no like, this is what it should look like. So it's kind of hard to be like, yeah, make sure it looks like this. So then, because then if it looks even slightly different, then it's kind of hard. It's kind of like blood pressure. There's no perfect blood pressure. There's a good range. There's a range. That's what we're kind of looking for. But there is poor blood pressure, and that's kind of how posture works as well. So I've included kind of both good and what poor posture examples would look like. So now from the side angles, what we're looking for here is, all I'm looking at now is at the head and at the pelvis. And so really what we're looking for is this back super arched? And I'll kind of show you an example of what would equal yes and what would equal it just looks normal. The other thing is we're also looking at the ears and head here. So once more, let's zoom in. And obviously I'm kind of looking a little bit upward. So this isn't a great example, but are the ears in line with the kind of the middle shoulder here? And because I'm looking up, they're back a little bit. So, don't worry too much about that. But are the ears in line with the shoulders? And now, as far as a bad example goes, so I'm wearing kind of a tighter shirt here. What we're looking for, so maybe you're kind of looking at this and you're going, oh, maybe I do have an arch. And here's kind of this is one of my old photos I've also mapped out here. The more like I call it kind of a dramatic or strong S, kind of like this, and the more, especially right here, if it really dramatically goes inwards, then you can mark this off. The other thing is, maybe you're looking at these two photos and it's like, oh, they look similar. So look at, obviously my shirt's kind of, tucked in there, all sorts of out of whack. But if you look at this line at the pelvis, so you can see based on kind of where it's scrunched up right here, this line is relatively straight. And that means we're good. So that means we're not dealing with what would be known as an anterior pelvic tilt. So what we want to look for is that line being straight. Right here, you can see clearly that slopes straight down. So right at where that kind of like belt line, hip line is, if that slopes straight down, especially if it's just very subtle, it's probably fine. But if it's pretty notable, mark it off. And I guess the other thing I mentioned is if we see, so yes, obviously if this is forward past the heads, mark it off. But if this was a little bit more arch, especially when the head's forward, this is what we would call kyphosis or slouch shoulder posture. That's another thing to mark off on the little posture assessment thing. Yeah, obviously I'm wearing a much tighter shirt here so that we can kind of see some of those lines a little bit better. But now the last thing, and this is where having it level starts to matter a little bit more. We want to look for, does one side of the hip sit higher than the other? If yes, mark it. Typically, you'll see kind of this right hip sitting a little bit higher than the left. But either way, if you see the hip, one side of the hip sitting higher, mark it. If you need, kind of use perspective lines. If it, as you can kind of see here, it's kind of tilted this way, but it lines up with the pelvis. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking for is, I mentioned how we're going to see potentially a better way to see if these arches have collapsed, and here you can absolutely see that. My ankles hurt just looking at this because trying to force this position to show, my ankles are still sore. So what we're looking for are the arches clearly collapsed, and even if you start to go, I can't really tell, look at kind of in the center of the heel, right in the Achilles area. If you notice the Achilles line kind of goes inwards before it goes up, then mark it. Mark it absolutely. When the Achilles line kind of goes inwards and then up, that's because the arches of the feet have completely flattened. And so it will send the feet going inwards. You'll also often see this paired with knees caving inwards. That's a very common one. But that's kind of all you'll see for the static. So like I said, not a whole lot, but this next part of the test matters infinitely more. So take all of those things that you marked off, look at them, and take them into consideration for right here. That's going to give you a starting point on where to look as we go. So this next test is the overhead squat assessment. So once more, you're going to get set up into this feet at hip width apart, second and third toe facing forward, and before you do anything, you're going to reach your arms up overhead. Now, the very first thing that you're going to note is look at your arms. So do your arms look more like an I or more like a Y? If they kind of fall outwards like this is very much more like a Y. That's one of the boxes you're going to mark on this specific test with the posture cheat sheet. Start. Boom. So now what we're looking at here is, once more, we're looking at the knees. These knees. So what you're looking for here now is, while you're squatting, do the knees stay in line with the second and third toe? So this is kind of the big toe. Once more, this is a perfect example why you don't wear socks. If it caves in notably, if the knees cave in notably and they're not in line with that second and third toe, mark it. If the knees cave outwards, that's another thing to mark. So those are two things you're looking for at the knees. You'll also look for, once more, if the arches of the feet flatten. So then I guess I should probably play this so you can kind of see it. But watch the knees. In this particular clip, you can kind of see that at the bottom, my knees, they kind of bounce. It gets shaking, they kind of bounce in and out. Great example why you don't wear socks on something slippery, because if the feet don't move, then the body's going to try and find stability somewhere else, and more often than not, you're going to see that more at the knees than anything else. The other thing to note is, if you were to look at the feet, if your feet turn out, so if the toes that are normally right here turn out, they did naturally turn out as if spreading a piece of paper, that is something to mark. Just like with the standstill test, the next part of this is, now you're going to do the same exact assessment, but this time you're going to do it while facing to the side of the camera. And so once more, feet set at hip width apart with the second and third toe facing forward. The big toe will be slightly inwards. Reach the arms up. Once more, we'll start at the shoulders. And once more, what we're looking at right here, when you reach overhead, by this point, your arms are either bent out at a Y or gone to an I, so you would already know. But if not, what we're looking for is, can you reach your arms to be in line with the ears without this lower back arching more than it was, or the ribs flaring? So it's like, if you go to reach your arms overhead and they just get kind of stuck right here, then that's going to be something you mark off on your cheat sheet. If you have to arch or the ribs flare really heavily like this, that's another thing to mark off on the cheat sheet. So then now let's zoom back out. So now the next thing we're going to be looking at during this particular test is boom. So when we get into the bottom of the squat, what happens here at the torso, the midsection? And so how we're going to determine this is, number one, are we leaning too far forward? Now, the way that we're going to look at this is, let's imagine we drew a line from right here, right at the center, going up from the lower leg, and a line going kind of right down here in the center once more, going up again. If we were to put those two lines side by side, would they ever intersect? Right here, as you can kind of see, not really. They look pretty even, pretty in line. However, if when you do this, there we go, okay. At the bottom of the squat here, as you can kind of see, right here, like at the lower leg, this, it's kind of a little more of a steep type angle. Whereas here, you kind of, it's not quite as steep. And so then this would be something we mark on the cheat sheet under the forward lean section. You get the point. The forward lean on the overhead squat assessment. Because if we were to put these lines together, they would eventually intersect kind of like, I can't really do it, but kind of like so. They would eventually intersect. And so that counts as a forward lean. So the next thing we would potentially want to look out for is when we're squatting down, does our back arch a lot? Pretty crazy. If it looks a little bit more like that, we're pretty good. We're probably good. But if we're doing this right here and we notice a huge arch in the lower back, that's something to mark off on the cheat sheet. Yeah, that's everything we would look for on that test. So now, same test, right? Once again, lighter close, so you can kind of see the lines we're looking for. Very first thing, once more. But if as you go to reach up, you see once more, Y instead of I, but then you also notice how you see this shrugging. This is a pretty big shrug. We don't want to see that shrugging. So this is what would be a bad example. If our shoulders stay more in place to kind of where they were when you reach overhead, you're good. But once more, if you see kind of like that shrugging, that's a sign of movement compensation. So, and we don't want that. So mark it on the cheat sheet. The next thing, once more, with the perspective lines or having it leveled, is we're going to be looking at, you can kind of see, let's zoom in here. This is not me trying to show off, by the way. So what you're looking for now is this line right here at the pelvis. If once more you see one side of the hip sits higher, and maybe you kind of like when you go to squat down, you shift toward a little bit more towards one side and one side sits higher, that's something to mark off on the cheat sheet. That's actually a huge one. If you see that, mark it off. And so as you can see, we're pretty in line with these perspective lines, so we're good right here. Then once more, just like with the flat feet, if you couldn't already see it before, like if you were to watch the arches of your feet right here, you might see, this can happen, so you might see both kind of cave in like this, clear and obvious collapse of the arch and pressure inwards. And so now that we've taken care of the first two tests, here's where it gets a little tricky. And as proof of such, this is my 10th time taking this. So you might not need this third test. So what I'm gonna have you do is take the posture cheat sheet, go do all of this, check off what you see, check off the posture assessment, and then come back. So once you do those first two tests, then come back. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through whether or not you even need to, and then at the end, I'll just have you skip forward to the end, and then you can see, okay, this is what I need to focus on. Okay, now that you're here, I'm going to assume you've now done the static test, you've done the overhead squat assessment, and you've checked off what you've seen, so now we can proceed. Here's how you know you don't need this third test. So I'm going to list off the three, and then on screen you'll see what minute mark you can skip to know exactly what to focus on. If you marked off only anything at the shoulders, so whether that's the arms falling out, making a Y instead of an I, not being able to reach the arms overhead so that they're in line with the ear, or not being able to do so, without arching or shrugging, then you don't need to do this. If you marked off either just the arch is collapsing or feet turn out, you don't need to do this. Maybe you marked off all three, that's fine. You still don't need to do this third test. So now on screen you should see when you can skip to in order to know exactly what to focus on. For everyone else, if you marked off one or all or any of the other things that I didn't mention, class resumes. So for this third test, this is where the 2 to 3.5 inch thick surface or elevation, whatever you want to call it, this is where this comes into play. You're going to set it up so that you can still have your feet at hip width apart with the second and third toe facing forward. And then once more, front, side, and angle from behind. Make sure your entire heel is on this, because if your entire heel isn't on this, it's gonna throw off results. So make sure your entire heel is on it, it's stable, and you're feeling good. So now that you're set up at the feet, you're going to, instead of reaching the arms overhead, you're going to put them on your hips. So now this front view, the only time you need this front view is if you marked off on the squat assessment, knees caving in or knees caving out. Everything else, your turn will be in a minute. So if you marked knees caving in or knees caving out, this is what you're looking for. So when you do this test, what you're going to note, what you're going to note on the modified squat assessment is what it's called, the modified squat assessment. You're going to mark whether or not the knees did the same thing as what they did in the previous one. So if on the previous test they caved in, you're going to watch, do they cave in again? That means a certain thing. Or do they cave in as much? If maybe they caved in a lot on the last test, but they only caved in slightly on this one, that means something. So we'll note that as well. Same goes with knees caving out. If they caved out majorly on the last one and didn't at all, or slightly did on this one but not as much, note that. If they still caved in as much or caved out as much, note that. So that's what we're looking for. That's all we're looking for in this front angle is, do the knees do the exact same thing as before? Now for the side angle. I guess we're just skipping to it. I guess we got to zoom out. Huh. We're going to zoom out. There we go. Yeah. I guess we got to zoom back in. Now, for this one, you only need this side angle if you marked off just like this one before, where the back over arches on, where is it? Yeah, this one. If your back looked like that on the squat assessment, so an overarched back, or if you lean too far forward, that's where the side angle comes in from. What you're going to note on this one is, so if your lower back did arch on the last one, does it arch again on this one? If yes, mark yes. If no, mark no. With the forward lean. Once more, we're looking at this angle from right in the center of the lower leg. If we were to draw a line from here and a line from here, and a line from right here, would they intersect? If yes, if that line does improve and you're not leaning so far forward compared to the lower leg, mark yes or no. Now for the last one, here all we're looking for is if we marked yes on one side of the hip staying higher than the other on the last test, or an uneven shift of the hips or the weight, that's what we're looking for here. So like if we go to do this test and we're looking at the line at the hips, and I think this was actually the example of what it could look like. Yep, right there. If you saw kind of this left knee didn't really do it, but the right knee, it caved in a little bit. And then you can now see relative to, let's zoom in here. Relative to this line right here, so this is kind of the line at the pelvis. So this line of this, whatever it's called down here, it goes kind of at an angle down. Well, compared to this is based on where my thumbs are at, that's straight, which means that's off. So that would be, we would mark yes, still shows, yes for still shows, no for no longer shows. Hopefully I clarified that on the paper. If not, my bad. So now that's kind of what we're looking for. So now that's it. If when you did the first squat assessment, you marked off anything at the shoulders and didn't have to do the third test, the area you need to focus on, the root cause of your issues, is the area between the lower chest and the head. So that could be overactive chest, pulling your shoulders in. That could be poor shoulder mobility. That could be the mid back is locked up, since that's considered in this area. The lats can also be an issue, so that's one of the kind of exceptions, is the lats could be with this one or any of the others. So if all you marked off was the shoulders, this is what's called upper body dysfunction. So the areas you need to focus on is from here to here. If on the first and second squat assessment, you marked off leaning too far forward, your imbalances, your issues are the area between the knees and the lower chest. If you marked off the back overarching on both the first and the second squat assessment, your issues are also the area between the knees and the lower chest. Same goes with if you marked off the hips shifting to more so to one side, or the hips shifting more to one side of the hips sit higher than the other, your issues are also in the area between the hips and the chest. What this means is you have something called lumbopelvic hip complex dysfunction, which is just industry jargon for the area between the knees and the lower chest. This could be overactive hip flexors pulling you down. It could be poor hip mobility. It could be poor movement at the hips. Regardless of what it is, the area that's currently giving you the most troubles with your imbalances is the area between the knees and the hips, the knees and the lower chest. So if you marked off any of these 5 things only on the first squat test, none of it showed up on the second squat test, or maybe you didn't even have to do it. If you marked off one of these 5 things, which is knees caving in or out, leaning too far forward, the back overarching, feet turn out, or the arches of the feet collapsing, you only marked one of those 5, or maybe multiple. If you marked any of those 5 on the first squat test, but not the second squat test, you have what's called lower extremity dysfunction, which means the area from the knee and lower, somewhere in there, that's where the root cause of your imbalances are. So that could be weak ankles or weak ankle mobility. That could be the arches of the weak muscles that hold up the arches of the foot. Somewhere in there, that is the root cause of your imbalances. So that is the answer to where for you. So that is the entire blueprint that I take all of my clients through to know exactly what is off with their posture. Now, maybe you're sitting there and you're like, great, I know what's off, but I don't even know where to start. Or maybe you've tried some things in the past and they didn't really work, or maybe they worked for a couple of minutes, but all the results were kind of short-lived. Maybe you want your results double-checked to make sure you got this right. If any one of those things hit at home and you'd like the entire posture correction system built out for you so you never have to second guess, DM me RYF on Instagram and I'll reach out and see if I can help.